As for me, I'm an established Hawaiian cultural and religious practitioner in Mauna Kea. In addition to participating in practices in common with others, I am also a participant in cultural and religious walks over the Aina and Mauna in the footsteps of my ancestors. I am the leader of the group Huakai Inam Aina Mauna. Mauna Kea is one of my special places. Because of these activities, the Hawaii State Constitution and my participation in the Hawaii State Appellate System that includes multiple appeals, I am not a member of the general public, and these rules do not or should not apply to me. Please consider that some of the rules that you are promulgating are based on rights that are constitutional and not delegable by DLNR. However, it is clear to see that even though the scope of these rules aren't broad enough to extend out to folks like me, it is clearly obvious that you are indeed attempting to exactly do that. You are attempting to exceed the scope of jurisdiction that you have been empowered with by Act 132. Although you get some kind of legal authority to establish the so-called proposed rules, are you in compliance with Act 132? I think not. To begin with, I will include in my testimony to the record of this rulemaking process, by reference, all of the official records of all the contested cases and other processes that are Mauna Kea related that are archived by DLNR and in the court system of the so-called state of Hawaii. This includes the Keck Observatory's outrigger telescopes, the Mauna Kea Comprehensive Management Plan, the first TMT CDUA contested case hearing, the second TMT CDUA contested case hearing, and the briefs and decisions of the respective appeals. By personal observation, I'm finding that this specific rulemaking process is insulting, ridiculous, and a sham. It borders on misrepresentation, deceit, and fraud. While its purpose is couched to address general public and commercial activities, it really is a manifesto to regulate Hawaiian cultural and religious practices on Mauna Kea, an activity that is way beyond the scope of the university's power, authority, and jurisdiction. I'm also very sorry to say that the regents as a collective are ignoring the supposedly very important process, being attended by two at Monday's Honolulu hearing and one at Tuesday's Hilo hearing. If the regents have divorced themselves from engaging in this process, how will they be able to competently vote to approve this process or not? One of the university's charges is to consult with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Depending on the definition of consult, to seek information or advice from someone with expertise, has successful consultation taken place? It appears from OA's comments submitted in this public hearing process that OA's information and advice to the process haven't been significantly implemented. As OA's objections and comments are numerous, the required consultation has failed. On the other hand, despite the Act 132 condition that states, access for traditional and customary Native Hawaiian cultural and religious purposes shall be accommodated, it appears that the opposite is taking place. From the tenor of these proposed rules, it clearly appears that the university's position, opposite from its legal charge of support and even advocacy for the practice of Hawaiian culture and religion, by the Hawaii State Constitution, its statutes and rules, and case law, is to attempt to regulate such practices out of existence on the mountain. The university, on the other hand, is guilty of mismanagement of the mountain, if we can believe Governor Ige and the state auditor, being fined $20,000 for allowing sub-lessee violations, attempts to put illegal, not supported by compliance with legal rulemaking rules in place, being complicit in curtailing customary and traditional Hawaiian cultural and religious practices, desecration, or allowed to be desecrated, of contemporary Ahu and other sites, without rules or authority, illegally blocking the access road under the guise of health and safety concerns, allowing the major modification of disappearing 30-plus feet of pu'u and sending them to oblivion, illegally burying gobs of rubbish on the mountain, being complicit in allowing astronomy activities to cause significant, substantial, and adverse impacts to cultural and environmental resources of the mountain, and presently intending to incrementally add more of such impacts to the mountain. Is the university the foremost desecrator and violator of Mauna Kea, qualified to promulgate rules for the general public and commercial activities? And to promulgate rules that will apply to those Hawaiian cultural and religious practitioners who you have no jurisdiction over? By the way, because cultural and religious practitioners may not look any differently than members of the general public, how are you going to know who you may have jurisdiction over and who you may not? I believe that identification will become a major problem. Personally, I'm waiting for the opportunity to pose you guys in court for false or illegal arrest and other criminal behavior, maybe even kidnapping. Are you regents, and possibly the governor, willing to be personally liable for such irrational, immoral, and illegal behavior? However, despite an overabundance of bad things that the proposed rules include, there are those that are extremely more obnoxious than others as they pertain to violations of the scope of your jurisdiction and common sense health and safety concerns. However, I don't have the time to enumerate the bulk of them. However, among the ones I will especially point out are: 1, the restriction of cell phones and other electronic devices. In August 2002, while my group was hiking between Pu'u-Makanaka and Pu'u, Illinois, one of our group developed an advanced case of altitude sickness. With no available means to get him off the mountain, as our position was about as inaccessible as is possible on the mountain, it was only by the use of a cell phone that we were able to call up an Army helicopter that could land and take the person off from the 12,000-foot altitude that we were at to timely evacuate him off the mountain. The use of a GPS instrument was important in efficiently getting the helicopter to point of pickup. A few years after that, again, it was a cell phone that beckoned the county helicopter to very steep terrain above Waikoloa training area, between the springs at Popo'okane and the then state park below, to take off one of our participants who had broken an ankle. It was so steep that the helicopter couldn't land, but it had to balance with part of its skid on the edge, while the rest of the helicopter was suspended in the air. Then in 2014, our group discovered the bones of a lost hiker who had perished in a snowstorm, and a cell phone was used to report the situation. That you would attempt to restrict cell phones for folks such as us, and in the situations that we sometimes find ourselves, is totally unconscionable, irresponsible, and a threat to public safety and health. It is also a crime against humanity. If sometime in the future a dire event should take place that could have been avoided by not having this restriction, are you willing to be held personally responsible and liable for promulgating such an absurd rule? The restriction of camping equipment. There have been a couple of situations when members of my group have been marooned on the mountain. In the item above, in the example of human bone discovery, the situation resulted in the group not getting to a pickup point in time, forcing them to spend the night on the mountain. They were able to survive because they had items that are included in this category with them. Yes, this category includes items of life-saving. It's insurance, folks, to avert possible catastrophe. If sometime in the future a dire event should take place that could have been avoided by not having this restriction, are you willing to be held personally responsible and liable for promulgating such an absurd rule? The restriction of flashlights. Are you kidding? A flashlight is one of the most important and required items to have on the mountain at all times. One never knows when he or she will be out there and needing one. We have used flashlights for signaling, even in the daytime. If sometime in the future a dire event should take place that could have been avoided by not having this restriction, are you willing to be held personally responsible and liable for promulgating such an absurd rule? The restriction to not be on the mountain at night. Over the course of many years, I have participated in many nighttime cultural religious activities that this restriction would impact. Specifically, observances, celebrations, and rituals at equinox and solstice times on the mountain will be totally impacted. I'm not ready to have you rule make the termination of this practice that is of great importance to me. Attempts to control the use of the Mauna Kea access road. While you may have a non-exclusive lease of the access road, you do not have full control over the roadway. Do you know what non-exclusive means? It means that there are others who have rights that you do not have, and those rights belong to the public and others. These are public rights. If your arrogance, or in your arrogance, you dare to make rules over a public roadway, or to close a public roadway off under the guise of health and safety concerns. Remember, Bill Gates thought he could do it on the night when he got married, but the law prevailed. Unfortunately, your arrogance hasn't yet been tested. Are you willing to be held personally responsible and liable for promulgating such an absurd rule that will impact the public's rights? Restrictions on being on pu'u. Generally speaking, pu'u areas are very important to Hawaiians. Many of our burials are located on them. Are you attempting to restrict us from visiting our cemeteries? You'd better not. You're interfering with and negatively impacting our cultural and religious rights. Attempts to control the use of the trails. This one takes the cake. In your and those of your advisors' exuberance and haste, you have decided to extend your non-existent jurisdiction to the trails on the mountain. Really? Are you guys that dumb? Or are you just a bunch of rubber stampers? Did anyone check to see if the trails are included in your general lease? Sorry to say, you guys haven't done your homework. Your arrogance prevents you to do so. The trails are not included in the general lease. So simply put, you do not have any control over the trails of Mauna Kea. That includes the Umikoa Trail, the Humuula Trail, and other trails. Yet your proposed rules blindly has you guys claiming control and making rules on their use. Are you regents foolhardy enough to accept personal liability to knowingly include dominion over the Mauna Kea trails when you don't have any semblance of rights to them? The law of the splintered paddle is applicable to Mauna Kea. You specifically do not have jurisdiction over the trails, and you definitely don't have the powers and authorities to trump the Hawaii State Constitution. Anyway, folks, I suspect that you will not be paying much attention to the contents of my and others' testimony, but please take heed as you are trying to enter into areas where you are not authorized and empowered to legally go. My best advice to you folks is to scrap these proposed rules and start over with good faith and intentions at the fore. However, please take notice that you have an obligation and duty to read and consider all testimonies of this public hearing and the knowing that is included. And be further noticed that if you intentionally and knowingly exceed your jurisdiction, and try to affect the rights that you have no business even trying or thinking to regulate, that you may be subject to personal liability. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Cooper. I am a resident of Waikoloa here. I have lived and worked on Mauna Kea for well over a dozen years now. My thanks to the university and its representatives for giving us this opportunity to testify as to the proposed rules for public access on Mauna Kea. In general, I support the rulemaking process. We do need rules so that everyone understands what you can and can't do on the mountain. I think this is a necessary process, and we should have a set of rules defining these. But I am in a weird position right now because, in broad sense, I am in agreement with both Mr. Flores and Mr. Ching, and that is a truly uncomfortable position for me as a supporter of astronomy on the mountain. I submitted my written testimony earlier today, and I find that the points I've made in that written testimony are almost line for line the same as what Mr. Flores said and Mr. Ching says on a number of points. So it's a little odd for me to have to admit that. I find the rules are, in general, badly over-restrictive and are a case of severe bureaucratic overreach in both their addressing of access to the mountain and what we can and cannot do on the mountain. I'm going to give a couple specific examples. Like I said, I did submit written testimony to the website earlier, or the email address listed earlier today. Hours of access. I'm going to start right there. I am an observatory employee, but I also use the mountain extensively for personal uses. I am not a cultural practitioner, so I stand here as a member of the general public who uses the mountain routinely for a number of different reasons. And as an example, hours of access. This rule is utterly unacceptable. There should be no hours of access to the mountain. The mountain should be available to anyone in the general public. It is public land. It belongs to all of us at any hour for whatever reason. The hours of access rules proposed by the university prevent that. I've seen several different definitions, like half an hour after sunset or half an hour before dawn. No, that's unacceptable. Back in February, I took a hike out to Lake Waiau under full moonlight and 2 feet of fresh snow. It was an absolutely sublime experience, something I will remember for the rest of my life. I was alone. I hiked out over the ice and snow, and it was beautiful. These are the reasons I go for the mountain: for personal fulfillment. I may not be a religious person, but that comes pretty close. To be out there alone on the summit of Mauna Kea at night under the stars and the moonlight is an experience that would be cut off by these rules, and I find that literally unacceptable. Flashlights. I've just pulled the flashlight out of my pocket. I have carried a flashlight literally every day on the mountain for over a decade. I found it an absolutely indispensable tool. Not having the flashlight is literally a safety hazard. It is incredibly easy to step on a large black rock on top of black cinder if you can't see it. And this is literally a violation of any sort of safety protocol. The rule does include, or the proposed rules do include, restrictions against interference with the observatories. That's enough. If you deliberately interfere with the observatories up there, I am a member of the observatory staff, that should be in the rules. But general use of flashlights should not be in the rules. Electromagnetic device. There is a prohibition against electromagnetic device. I'm going to submit that whoever wrote that paragraph has no idea what they're talking about. Electromagnetic device is anything that uses a battery. I'm an electrical engineer. I do have some knowledge of this stuff. That would outlaw or prohibit in the rules the use of cameras, watches, vehicles, pacemakers is an electromagnetic device. This is a wonderful example of the rules being overly broadly written. I think they were intending to restrict radio transmitters. Maybe they should use the FCC language of intentional radio frequency transmitter and not electromagnetic device. Another point I'm going to take is insurance for non-commercial uses. If I apply for a group permit, which I have done on a number of occasions, there is a requirement for insurance, and it is specifically permitted in the rules as a thing. This has the unintended consequence of closing the mountain to any group for any reason if you don't have the pockets of a commercial operation. So if you have a church group, a school group, a group of hikers that has 12 people in it, they are now required to have insurance. Now, if you ask me, well, no, we don't inquire that. I have applied for such permits and been told of this requirement in no uncertain terms. As a result, we did not perform that activity. I am the president of the local astronomy club here. We would love to tour telescopes and get a group permit for this sort of stuff. I have to restrict the size of my tours to 10 instead of the 12 or 14 people who want to come because of this insurance requirement. Our astronomy club does not charge dues. We have no financial, we have no bank account. How am I going to pay for insurance? But yet I must get, I think the requirement was for $1 million of liability insurance with the university and the state named as beneficiaries of that insurance. I'm sorry, this is unacceptable. You are closing the mountain to the local residents to whom the mountain belongs. Unintentionally, but effectively. Another things, hiking on pu'u. What's a pu'u? It's a cinder cone, right? I think the rule is intended to prevent people from hiking up the steep slopes and leaving footprints that can last for a number of years. But as written, the rule doesn't say that. It says you can't hike on a pu'u. Well, that's pretty much all of the science reserve is pu'us. Anything covered with cinder surface. That rule should be rewritten to either define specific pu'us that are off limits or define steep slope and footprints or something like that. Again, the rule is overly restrictive. Air toys, kites, whatever. Why is the rule there? There's no justification given in the rules for why this rule is even required. I know a guy who likes to fly a kite with a camera on it and has done on the around the observatories to take aerial photos. Good enough. I would point out that drones are already forbidden by the fact that you can't use anything that transmits radio frequency. Four-wheel drive. You require low gear four-wheel drive for the access to the mountain. There is no reason for low gear four-wheel drive. I am an observatory personnel. I drive up the mountain all the time. I never use low gear four-wheel drive unless I'm on ice. You don't need it. There's no reason for it. You need to use your engine braking coming down. You need to have a vehicle that can safely ascend and descend the mountain. But I never use low gear four-wheel drive. It's a pain. And I use second gear and brake coming down, a little both, and watch how much I'm using the brakes so I don't overheat my brakes. That's a matter of education. There's a lot of things there. I am going to address one objection that a number of the people here have said, that observatory personnel are not restricted to, or not subject to the same rules. As an observatory personnel, I'm going to say our rules are actually worse. There's a specific prohibition in my observatory policy of snow play anytime the mountain is not open to the public. We can't do it. We face disciplinary action if we do those things. So if you're complaining about the observatory personnel not having rules, yeah, we have them. They're just not written down by the state. They're in observatory policies, and in general, they're more restrictive than what's here. Yeah.
You've worked there for over 10 years.
Nearly a dozen years now.
Excuse me. This is not a, you're welcome to testify, but it's not appropriate to question testifiers. So please sign up to testify if you would like to make points.
I'll answer your question later privately, if you would.
Thank you.
That's basically what I've got. The rules go too far, and they really need a hard, long look from both the viewpoint of the general public, from the viewpoint of cultural practitioners, from the viewpoint of they just go too far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha kako, I am Claude Sutcliffe, I live Waimea. My mountain is Mauna, my water is Waikoloa. I'm privileged to live here And it's important that you understand that this isn't just a Hawaiian issue. Many non-Hawaiians demand respect for the Mauna. And, you know, when I listen to Kahu, when I listen to Kumu, when I listen to Onku, you know, the astronomers, everyone agrees these rules tend to be dumb. You say, why on earth is UH doing that? In Kalamai, it appears to me the only reason is that they're really intended to facilitate construction of the proposed 30-meter telescope. Let me see. You can't go at night, you can't park, you can't camp, you can't have a flashlight, you can't have a cell phone, you know, you can't communicate. And you say, oh my, wait a minute, doesn't that sound like DLNR? Wasn't that the emergency rules? They already tried that? Arrested people at night praying, you know, ruled illegal. Oh my. And I've you know, tried to be open. I've listened to Greg Chun. I've seen his brochure. And the argument he makes, citing actually the 2014 state audit, that, you know, UH is doing better now. You say, Kalamai. When I read that audit, it says they're still doing a bad job. So bad that Governor Ige even admits that the government of Hawaii, DLNR, UH, have failed in their protection of the Mauna, which means we must. And you're trying to make it harder for me to do that. That's wrong. And I remind you that there are quite a few, as again, non-Hawaiians as well as Hawaiians, who will stand to protect the Mauna. And the courts have repeatedly ruled when we've been arrested that it is preferable to break a rule in service of a greater good. And that greater good is aloha aina and protection of our sacred Mauna. Mahalo.
Thank you. My name is François Arlac. I've been a guest here in the Kingdom of Hawaii for the past 13 years. And this is not about rules or management of the mountain or about safety of the public. It's an assault. It's an assault upon a religion. It's an assault upon a culture. It's an assault upon the Hawaiian people. And this whole hearing here seems to be a big exercise in futility, as it's been mentioned before. The rules will be written regardless of the input of tonight and the other events as well. And it seems, as it's been mentioned already, the whole raison d'être, the whole goal of the maneuver here for those rules is to harass Mauna Kea protectors. It's been designed especially to help the construction of a TMT. And we will not stand for that. It is wrong, and it's not just Hawaiian people, it's many of us. And we will protect that mountain to our very last breath. And you will know our voices loud and clear. You may deny our voices tonight, you may think, oh, no big whoop. You may be recorded and slapped somewhere in a desk, never to be heard again, but we will be heard upon the mountain, because we will never, ever give up the protection of Mauna Kea. Mahalo. Thank you.
If you could please state your name for the record.
My name is Patricia Ikeda. I am from Captain Cook, Kona. I oppose the rules, the proposed rules. You know, after listening to Karen Murray's testimony last night and others speaking yesterday, I agree that the university has lost sight of what their purpose is, and that is to educate. Not to compete to be the best or at the top of the research realm at the detriment of the locals and the Hawaiian people. Out of the many proposed rules, the ridiculous rules that the university is trying to pass, which targets the Hawaiian people and the locals, is the permit issue, Ole. Who are you to require Kapoe Hawaii to get a permit to enter our sacred mountain? And who are you to require us to get a permit to practice our culture on the Mauna? And who are you to regulate the hours of entry to our Mauna? Heva. The university is desperate to have the 30-meter telescope built and they will go to all lengths to have their way, even if it means hurting the host culture, us. I believe they want these rules in place before the Supreme Court makes their decision, because if they lose, they will have an advantage to place on a stop to us if we don't agree to any future endeavors that the university may have. But if they win, they know to expect us back on the Mauna, and they want to make sure that we are prosecuted for breaking their ridiculous rules. Shame on the university. See you on the Mauna.
Thank you.